there's many different ways you can tell a story with the music, and you sort of you don't want to miss out on some other cool idea because you pursued one. So that's the agony of it, I guess.
I suppose why I chose this because I do realise, and you would know this sitting in that sort of that music suite, is that really music makes the film. When you don't have the film in there, it's sort of nothing, isn't it?
The music is nothing, or the film is nothing?
The film is nothing. It's music that gives it that the emotion, the empathy, the strength.
Yeah, it's only a very special film that can, stand not having any music, and there are some.
Okay.
Yeah, No Place for Old Men, is it? No Country for Old Men.
Right.
That's got no score. And yeah, there's a few actually, but yeah, you're right. It really helps to put us into the heads of the characters.
Pink Panther's coming through, Lawrence of Arabia, the soundtrack to the Mission movie, War of the Worlds. What would you have added?
Well, I'm a big fan of like Quincy Jones's scores. So he did In Cold Blood and In the Heat of the Night and The Pawnbroker. And I like Masaru Sato's scores. So he did the Godzilla films and a whole bunch of Kurosawa films, and he's one of my favourites. I like those composers that combine orchestral instruments with kind of, either traditional instruments from, their cultures, or like Masaru Sato did, or also rock and pop instruments, and you get this sort of unexpected combinations. I do like that. And Morricone, obviously, is
Morricone.
Great. Yeah, the Battle of Algiers is one of my favourite soundtracks that he did that gets a bit overlooked.
Yeah, well, nice to have on the program, Carl. Thank you very much for that. That's film and TV music producer Carl Stephen there. But there is nothing like, isn't it amazing, Lavina? You just had to sing a refrain of that movie, and in your mind you can see that theme, you can see that image.
See it, exactly.
Yeah.
And you know what, it's not just the music either for me, it's like directors like Guy Ritchie that incorporate sound effects as well, that can also set the tone for movies. But I just think it's been amazing over the years, and the movies that have been made without the music doesn't really have that theme that you love so much. And even Raiders of the Lost Ark, I mean, how great is that? We can sing that fantastic one. Take it away, Wallace.
No, Nick Leggett, that's your turn.
No. I was going to say the one that I love is Dallas, the TV show. It always feels like, or felt like, something was going to happen, something really exciting. It's that feeling that when the tune plays, that it pushes something in you. That's what a good theme tune does.
Meanwhile, rice cooking, we'll have more on this tomorrow. My husband got sick of scrubbing burnt rice pans. He taught me how to cook it in the microwave. 1 cup rinsed rice, 2 cups boiling water, oil or butter and salt. Go for high 6 minutes, stir, then cook another 6 minutes, adding turmeric, nigella seeds. It takes it to the next level. Yellowy, yum, says Brett. Pretty good, eh?
And you're not throwing away the rice cooker when it breaks a year later either.
You got it.
With the microwave theory. Just putting it out there, Wallace. Okay, while we're on that theme.
Yeah, Lavina Good, Nick Leggett, thank you very much for being with us on Thursday's show. I'm Wallace Chapman. Next, Checkpoint is next. I'm back with you tomorrow, Friday, 3:45. See you then.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, COVID fears mean some parents are refusing to send their children back to school until next year, while other students may be playing catch-up over the summer. A livestock ship with 43 crew, including 2 New Zealanders, and almost 6,000 cattle is missing at sea. Is New Zealand underachieving when it comes to child welfare, or are the stats simply out of date? A campervan company takes another hit as fire rips through their Auckland operation. The Prime Minister is managing expectations when it comes to the prospect of lowering COVID alert levels. And if you're sick in managed isolation with anything but COVID, how far away is medical help?
RNZ News at 5. Good evening, I'm Susana Leatawa. A crew member rescued from the cargo ship that went missing during a typhoon with 40 people on board, including 2 New Zealanders, says it capsized in the high seas. The Gulf Livestock One, with 6,000 cattle, left Napier 3 weeks ago for China. It sent a distress signal this morning from the East China Sea after being caught up in Typhoon Maisak. The Japanese Coast Guard has rescued one person, a Filipino crew member, who says the ship's engine failed before it was hit by a wave and capsized. The Minister of Foreign Affairs says his staff both in New Zealand and in Tokyo are working closely with Japanese authorities as the search continues. Winston Peters says not much is known at this stage, but it's a sad situation for the families.
It's a very sad situation for those families. Hopefully it's not not what we might suspect. We're hoping for the best, but in the meantime, we just don't know.
Winston Peters says because of the maritime traffic in the area, it will be like looking for a needle in a haystack if there is no emergency signal coming from the ship. New Zealand Steel is to restructure its business with the likely loss of up to 200 jobs, but continue steel making at its Glenbrook mill. The mill's Australian owners signalled a review in May because it wasn't paying its way. Here's business editor Giles Beckford.
The future of the loss-making steel mill and the associated Pacific Steel business in Auckland has been hanging in the balance for some time. The owners, BlueScope, wrote off about $200 million from the mill's value just last month. The company says all options were considered during the review, but the popularity of its top-selling colour steel has saved manufacturing. But other loss-making products will go in the restructuring, which will result in 150 to 200 staff out of the current 1,400-strong workforce being laid off. This is Giles Beckford.
The Prime Minister says it is slow progress tackling child poverty, but it is progress nonetheless. Jacinda Ardern is defending her record in the face of a lacklustre UNICEF ranking. The UN Children's Agency has ranked New Zealand 35th out of the 41 most developed countries in terms of the well-being of children. Ms Ardern says it's likely those who are most vulnerable will bear the brunt of the economic downturn during the COVID-19 pandemic.
We've set goals that are both across a 3-year period but also across a 10-year period. They are ambitious goals. Already we've seen improvement on child poverty on 7 out of the 9 indicators we have, when previously they were worse.
Jacinda Ardern says the UNICEF report largely paints a picture of the previous government's underinvestment, and it will take time to improve children's lives. Public health officials in Auckland are confident the current COVID-19 outbreak is being contained. There are 2 new cases of the disease today, one in the community linked to the Auckland cluster and one in managed isolation. Of the 115 active cases, 36 are people in managed isolation and 79 are from the community. The Director of Auckland Regional Public Health, Dr William Ranger, says the case numbers and the epidemiological evidence suggest the epidemic curve peaked about 2 weeks ago, and he says overall the trend is downwards. The Nurses Union is hoping nationwide strike action by primary care nurses today will spur the government to come up with the cash to settle their pay dispute. At a lunchtime rally outside Parliament, a spokesperson for the nurses' organisation, Suzanne Rolls, says it isn't fair that staff in primary care are paid thousands of dollars less than nurses working for DHBs.
They deserve what they're worth, and at the moment they're not getting what they're worth, and we're going to see more issues around retention in the coming years.
Suzanne Rolls says talks with employers have dragged on all year, but only the government has the power to fix the pay gap. It's 4 minutes past 5. The last-minute heroics by New Zealand basketballer Steven Adams weren't enough to help Oklahoma City Thunder get past the first round of the NBA playoffs. They lost the 7th and final game of their Western Conference playoff series to the Houston Rockets, 104-102. Down by 1 with 40 seconds to play, Adams secured a turnover, which the Thunder were unable to convert to points. And then with 20 seconds left, he pulled down a defensive rebound, but again, the Thunder were unable to convert it. Houston will now play the LA Lakers in the semi-finals. The Blues at number 8, Hoskins Sotutu, has been given the opportunity to press his final claims for the All Blacks after being named in the North Island starting lineup to play the South in Wellington on Saturday. Sotutu impressed in Super Rugby Aotearoa before getting injured in July. The All Blacks coach Ian Foster is due to name his first squad on Sunday, with Sotutu a strong contender to replace former captain Kieran Reid in the number 8 jersey. Meanwhile, the South Island coach Brad Moore has been impressed by the condition of the players after a rugged Super Rugby competition.
They've come in absolutely superb physically and mentally. Don't have any worries at all about that. Actually, they are fizzing and fresh.
The former Silver Fern defender, 37-year-old Anna Harrison, is coming out of retirement to play in next year's ANZ Netball Premiership, having signed with the Northern Stars. That's the news.
Child welfare.
We've normalised inequality. Somehow it's all right that we've got children whose families can't afford homes and are living in motels.
Children's Hospital. The department has been refused funding to pay for 15 staff to run it, so it has 12 beds for children. They'll be empty when Hagley opens. And children's programs.
Harry and Meghan have signed a multi-year deal with Netflix
to do documentaries, children's programming, dramatic series.
All ages catered for. Morning Report weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast for a Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Fine, but areas of cloud developing tomorrow night. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, cloudy periods and occasional showers north of Wairoa, becoming fine tomorrow morning. Horowhenua to Wellington, fine tonight, cloud developing tomorrow with showers about the Tararua range from the afternoon. Nelson, Marlborough and northern Canterbury, fine tonight, high cloud developing tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, fine tonight, cloud and drizzle developing tomorrow morning, turning to rain with brief heavy falls in Westland from the afternoon. Fiordland, light showers turning to heavy rain tomorrow morning, easing to showers by tomorrow night. Southern Canterbury, Otago and Southland, fine tonight, scattered rain spreading north from tomorrow afternoon with heavy falls about the headwaters. And Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with isolated showers tomorrow. RNZ National, 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Tonight, a livestock ship with 43 crew on board, including two New Zealanders, is said to have capsized in typhoon conditions in the East China Sea. But first, school rolls in Auckland continue to languish, despite pleas from the Education Minister to get kids back into classrooms. Some principals are still reporting turnouts of 50% or less, and fear it's the students who can least afford it who are missing out. Nita Blake-Person reports.
This Auckland mum was all set to send her 3 kids back to their South Auckland school on Monday, but more COVID cases changed her mind.
I have made the decision to keep them home for this week, just out of safety for my children and until numbers are reduced slightly. And they were tested on Monday for coronavirus, which all our tests have come back negative. And I just, at the moment, being a parent and just wanting to keep my kids safe.
She's not alone in her fears. She polled some of her friends on Facebook and found many are in the same boat, with some not planning to send kids back until next year.
Feedback I got from that was a big decision. There was a lot of parents that said to me that they are not sending their children back to school until we move down to at least alert level 1 or until next year, which I think until next year may be a bit over the top. But then we don't know, we could end up in lockdown again in a couple of months. We just don't know what's going to happen with this because everything's so unpredictable.
Thousands of students across the super city haven't gone back since the second lockdown, but it's South Auckland which appears to be hardest hit. At Dawson Primary in Otara, just 38% of kids have returned. Sutton Park School is sitting around 40% and the nearby Mangere East School has around half of its students back. At Mount Roskill Primary, 53% of kids are in class. Principal Mike O'Reilly says there are plenty of nervous parents in the community.
I think parents were worried about the Mount Roskill Church cluster, and some of our families do attend that church. So I know there was some concern around that. And I also just think people are being cautious around the general COVID situation. That's what we're hearing. They're still not sure. They're still a bit worried. I don't know if they feel as informed as they might be. Many of our families don't speak English that well. So I sometimes wonder whether, what sort of messages they're hearing, and maybe they're not getting all the information.
Further north, school rolls are much healthier. Across the bridge at Northcote Primary, just 10% of kids are away today. Mike O'Reilly says he fears current inequities in classrooms are being exacerbated by COVID-19.
We're getting about 65% engagement in the distance learning that goes on that we've been providing. Yeah, we do have some concerns around educational outcomes for some of our families and children. Those students who are missing out before COVID, it's been exponential in terms of the impact that COVID's had on them and their families.
All schools spoken to by Checkpoint say their attendance has risen throughout the week and are hopeful school rolls will look healthier by Monday. But the Education and Health Minister Chris Hipkins says time is of the essence.
We have this advice rigorously tested. We get a variety of different, public health experts feeding into that process. It is safe to have your kids back at school at level 2. Schools are aware of what the additional things they can do are to keep kids safe and to keep everybody in the school community safe. So please, my plea to parents really is do send your kids back to school. They're losing valuable learning time, and there really isn't the public health risk that really should be resulting in those kids staying home.
For college kids who are becoming increasingly anxious about NCEA, Chris Hipkins says the Ministry for Education is looking at ways to make things less stressful for them.
So we've already extended the time frame for NCEA exams, so we've pushed that out so that they'll be a bit later this year than they normally would be. We've also pushed out the date for submission of portfolios, which is also part of the NCEA assessment process, and we have put in place a supplementary credits regime for those students who are still doing learning but maybe wouldn't have been able to do the level of assessment that they normally would have been able to do in a year.
The Minister isn't ruling out further learning throughout summer for college kids to help ease what's been an incredibly disrupted year for students. For Checkpoint, Corneta Blake-Person, Aho.
Japan's Coast Guard has rescued one person in the search for a livestock ship with 43 crew and nearly 6,000 cattle on board. 2 New Zealanders were on the vessel that's gone missing in the East China Sea as a typhoon lashed the region. The ship left Napier nearly 3 weeks ago and was bound for China. Andrew McRae reports.
The ship sent a distress call yesterday from west of Amami Oshima Island in southwestern Japan. Strong winds and rain from Typhoon Maisak are hampering rescue efforts. The crew was made up of 39 people from the Philippines, 2 from Australia and 2 from New Zealand. A spokesperson for Japan's Coast Guard says just one person has been found so far. That Filipino crew member told the Coast Guard the ship's engine failed before it was hit by a wave and capsized. Foreign Affairs Minister Winston Peters says a lot is still unknown at this stage, but it's a sad situation for the families.
Hopefully it's not not what we might suspect. We're hoping for the best, but in the meantime, we just don't know.
He says because of the maritime traffic in that part of the world, it'll be like looking for a needle in a haystack if there's no emergency signal coming from the ship.
I don't want to speculate on it at this point in time. I hope things turn out okay.
It's believed the ship was converted from a container ship to one carrying livestock. It's registered in Panama and owned by Gulf Navigation Holdings based in Dubai. 2 people from New Zealand joined the vessel before it left Napier. It's not known what their roles were, but it's possible one may have been a vet. One of the 2 Australians on board has been confirmed as a vet and the other a stockman. MPI says it didn't employ the 2 New Zealanders. The president of Federated Farmers, Andrew Hoggard, says any views on the rights or wrongs of live cattle exports need to be put to one side at the moment.
I hope that they're able to find those crew members. I mean, that's the most important thing right now. Finding as many people, well, hopefully all of them, safe and well, it's got to be the top priority of mine for everyone up there that's involved in hopefully the search and rescue.
An Australian vet who has done 57 voyages on livestock ships describes the ship as relatively small, as some can carry up to 20,000 animals. Lynn Simpson says the smaller the vessel, the greater the risk in rough weather. She believes the economic realities of live animal shipments mean a ship is under pressure to get to its destination as quickly as possible.
So that might explain why the ship headed straight to a typhoon, which should have been visible on weather weather reporting and radars, and you would think somebody would try to avoid it. But whether the typhoon moved unpredictably or the master wasn't aware that it was in their path, it's hard to tell.
Lynn Simpson says in shipping, there are often risks taken to save money. She has a view on how the ship might have been as it neared the end of its voyage, as it became lighter in weight, as more feed for the animals and fuel was used up.
So any weight that was down below, which sort of acts as a heavy ballast and keeps the ship generally, more stable, is then used up and basically gone. So the ship becomes more top-heavy. So when it hits rough weather, then it's at more danger of rolling and causing injury and or capsizing.
Cattle shipments to China made up the majority of the live export trade out of New Zealand. By the end of last month, nearly 40,000 cattle had been shipped there. In June last year, the government launched a review into live animal exports. Submissions closed in July this year, but no decisions yet been made. For Checkpoint, Ko Andrew McRae-Tene.
Damien O'Connor is the Minister responsible for live exports. He declined to be interviewed this evening, but joining me now is the Green Party spokesperson on animal welfare, Gareth Hughes. Good evening, Gareth. I think we should probably start by acknowledging this is a terrible situation all around. 43 crew on board there and a search currently underway. But this situation has obviously put attention back on the issue of live exports. Should New Zealand be doing this?
Well, kia ora, Lisa, and can I please start by just acknowledging the 2 New Zealanders on board that vessel, the families back home in New Zealand. This will be a time of worry, of great stress and anxiety, and my thoughts go out to them. I understand the latest news is that one person has been pulled from the sea. So I think we can be hopeful that we can see more come out soon, but this is a crisis emergency situation, and my thoughts go to those families.
Totally understand that. On the issue of the live exports, should New Zealand still be exporting live animals for breeding?
No, I don't think so. The government is currently reviewing the practice after that scandal of what we saw with the sick, dead and dying cattle sent to Sri Lanka. And it's something that I don't think should be continuing. We know these animals do suffer with distress aboard the ships for potentially weeks at sea. It's something that I've urged the Minister to act with haste on. I'm disappointed the review has taken so long to get to this point, but I've been very clear the Green Party's preference is for a ban on live export. We already have that for slaughter, but there is a loophole with the live export for breeding, and I fear that what we're actually seeing is the numbers ramp up as the review is dragging on. So I'm urging the Minister to take the strongest possible prohibition and to act with haste.
So why do you think it has taken so long? Because this review has been underway for more than a year. Submissions are closed. Have you had any update?
No, I've been requesting updates from the Minister's office, including today. It's something I've been urging haste in all my communications with him previously. I have debated the Minister on this issue, and he's likened it to, pets aboard the Inter-Islander, and respectfully and frankly, I think it's completely different. I've sailed around New Zealand waters on the Rainbow Warrior. I know how rough it is, and comparing a 3-hour hop across the strait to weeks at sea, in the Southern Ocean, I think is a different kettle of fish. Look, I don't think it's good for the animals. We know they suffer, and we're a party that stands up for animals, the Greens. I don't think it's in our economic interest. I think it damages our international agricultural brand. And sadly, when you go out into a maritime environment, there are always risks involved. And sadly, we're seeing what the weather can throw up.
The counter to that, I suppose, is it is a relatively small number of animals. It's dropped from the peaks that were being exported. There are vets on board. Experienced stock handlers are required to be on board. These animals are for breeding only, not slaughter. And export certificates are only issued if the ministry is assured of animal welfare conditions. Isn't that enough?
No, we're still talking about tens of thousands of animals confined in very small spaces at sea. They can't understand what's happening with the rough conditions out there. Look, I've talked to many farmers that don't think it's in our economic interest to be sending our genetic material overseas. We could be sending, fertilised eggs or semen overseas instead without those animal welfare impacts. But there's also the reputational impact. We're exporting our animals to countries with lower animal welfare standards, and we have no control once we export these animals. So there's a huge number of moral, economic, reputational reasons why this practice should be banned. We can still export genetic material if we want to, but we don't have to export these animals.
The MPI website says the final decision on the review will consider the impact of COVID-19 on primary industries and their potential to lead New Zealand's economic recovery. These are tough times. New Zealand might need to keep this business or expand it.
It is tough times, and we're working to grow jobs within the government. However, we can still be exporting our intellectual property, if you were, the genetic material, but without exporting the animals. So there are a lot of farmers that I talk to that don't think this is in our economic interest, full stop.
It brings in about $250 million a year. That's not small change.
That's right, but we could be exporting the genetic material without exporting the animals. We do this in other sectors already. So, look, I think we're a country that stands up for animals. We've got some of the highest legislation in the world for animal welfare standards, but sadly some of the practices aren't living up to those high values or aspirations that Kiwis have. So this is an issue which the Green Party has been very clear on. We want to see an end to this practice to make sure the animals aren't suffering in pain and distress.
Given what's happened, given that the review seems to have not reached any conclusions yet, are you going to be asking the Minister to halt all live exports in the meantime?
Well, previously, as a constructive solution, I've already publicly suggested that the Director-General for the Ministry of Primary Industries could put a moratorium in place. Already that office signs off on live exports. The statutory criteria, one of the points is reputational issues. Given this is being currently reviewed, I think it would make sense actually to have a moratorium on the practice until this review is out. But ultimately, I want to see this review concluded and I want to see this practice ended.
Before you go, Gareth, James Shaw, should he stay on as a leader or not, given his decision on this funding for a private school?
Yeah, he should stay on. He's got my support. I think he's actually shown a lot of mana in the last week. He's taken responsibility, he's apologised, and he's trying to find a solution. So I think he's doing a good job.
You're heading off this term, but it must be pretty disappointing to see your party embroiled in this kind of turmoil just weeks out from an election.
Well, we've achieved a huge amount this term. Sadly, my $16 million, which I worked on with Minister Hipkins to get solar panels into schools, didn't get as much media attention as this one. But we've got a great track record of success. The issues we're working on are front and foremost for many Kiwis. There's still a lot of work to do in terms of inequality and climate change, and I'm sure we'll be back, and a big part of the next government to deliver for Kiwis.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is Gareth Hughes, who is the Green Party's spokesperson on animal welfare. It is, we'll call it 23 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback on that. Should New Zealand carry on with live exports? They're only allowed for breeding, not for slaughter. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. I'm also interested to hear from you if you are holding your children back from school at the moment because of concerns around COVID-19. Do get in touch. Education Minister Chris Hipkins has been dragged into the Green School controversy after a video was leaked of James Shaw showing he had given verbal sign-off for the bid. Mr Hipkins has been actively distancing himself from the proposal, saying publicly it's not something he'd spend education money on. James Shaw, the co-leader of the Greens, has been working to repair the damage after infuriating party supporters, schools and unions with his strong advocacy for the nearly $12 million application for the private school. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
James Shaw has repeatedly apologised and stated his regret for backing the project. As part of the damage control, he held a Zoom meeting for more than 400 party members on Friday night to talk through how he's ended up in such a predicament.
Chris is not one of the budget ministers, so he wasn't intimately involved in the decision.
But that call is now causing him even more of a headache, with this clip leaked to RNZ.
Because Vote Education doesn't fund this kind of thing. He did say that, assuming everything else being equal, that as long as the funding partner is the council, which it is, that he was okay with it. So he did sort of give at least a verbal sign-off to the project.
The problem for James Shaw is Labour ministers have clambered to distance themselves from anything to do with the Green School proposal, including Education Minister Chris Hipkins. The bid was approved by a group of wider ministers under an infrastructure fund. They say he should take full responsibility as the sole advocate. That advocacy extended to threatening to block at least 44 projects earmarked for $600 million of funding, unless the Green School project was given the green light. Chris Hipkins was not one of those ministers, but says he and Mr Shaw did discuss the bid.
Where I indicated to him that it was not a priority for education funding. It's not the sort of thing that we would fund through education. But of course, I'm not one of the ministers involved in the decisions around the shovel-ready project, so it was not a matter for me to sign off or otherwise. I wasn't involved in that process.
Would he describe it as having given the bid the verbal sign-off?
No, look, I think that would mischaracterise the conversation.
No support for Mr Shaw either from New Zealand First leader Winston Peters.
Why on earth is he plotting the Labour Party then? He had the relationship with them. And in the end, when you make a botch up, accept it yourself. Stop blaming everybody else.
National's Judith Collins says someone's not telling the truth.
So they need to actually decide which one it is and then let us all know.
ACT leader David Seymour says Mr Hipkins should stop the money going to the Green School, regardless of any comments he made to James Shaw.
If Chris Hipkins agrees with funding the Green School, then that is a real disappointment. But if he truly disagrees, then he should pull the funding as a senior member of Cabinet. He should be using his influence to do the right thing.
RNZ has also been given more detail about James Shaw's explanation to members for backing the bid. In the Friday Zoom meeting, he said they'd been coloured by the experience with the New Zealand Upgrade programme in January, in which billions of dollars was committed to roading. Mr Shaw declined an interview again today, but said in a statement he stands by his commentary on the members' call and continues to feel supported by caucus and the membership. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
The Prime Minister is managing expectations over the next step in the COVID alert levels, which she will announce tomorrow. Jacinda Ardern says Cabinet will err on the side of caution when making a decision about whether Auckland's ready to move out of alert level 2.5 and if the rest of the country will return to level 1. There were 2 new cases of COVID today, one in the community and one in managed isolation. And Auckland health authorities say they're quietly confident they're on top of the cluster. Jean Bell reports.
Cabinet ministers will meet tomorrow to review the alert level settings, which is set to expire on Sunday. Auckland is at alert level 2.5, which means there are tighter restrictions on social gatherings, only 10 people, or 50 for funerals or tangi. In Auckland, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern told reporters what's next when considering changing levels.
So the same things that we always consider. What are the nature of the cases that we have in front of us? Whether or not, of course, we're seeing those linked to the existing cluster, and just general containment. But we also look at things like compliance. We do factor in the cost of restrictions. So we have a wide range of criteria that we've applied all the way through our COVID response.
She wouldn't be drawn on whether it's likely the current levels will be retained or not, saying it's up to Cabinet to decide.
We've been at this level only for a very short period of time. We are still in this early-ish stages then of seeing that impact on the cluster. And so these are all things that Cabinet will consider.
She says the Cabinet will be cautious and she urges Aucklanders to follow suit.
We don't want to get ahead of ourselves, so making sure that we reduce the risk as much as possible. We know some of the most at-risk times tend to be around weekends, for instance. So that's why I implore again Aucklanders to apply those rules. Please don't join gatherings of more than 10 people. Think carefully about your activities. Stay safe.
Meanwhile, the director of the Auckland Regional Public Health Service, Dr William Ranger, says they're confident authorities have a solid grip on the cluster, which currently has 115 active cases. Speaking from Middlemore Hospital at today's daily COVID-19 cases update, he says almost all of the cases are related to the cluster. Of the 2 new cases of COVID-19, one has been linked to the Auckland cluster and the other is in managed isolation.
All cases that are coming through, except for the maintenance person, are related to the B11 cluster. So with all the community testing that's going on, there's no new strain that is being identified.
Dr. Ranger says the ability to contact trace new cases is also reassuring. In the last week, 85% of close contacts have been reached within 48 hours of being identified.
Putting together all those pieces of information, as well as looking at the overall epidemic curve, it gives us confidence.
The Health Minister Chris Hipkins says Aucklanders have done a great job following the rules and he's asking them to continue if they are travelling outside the region.
Please take your enhanced alert level with you. So act as if you are still in Auckland when you're outside of Auckland and follow those same rules that apply to you in Auckland if you are travelling outside of the region.
Mr. Hipkins also took aim at conspiracy theories whirling around on social media, falsely claiming the government would make COVID-19 vaccinations compulsory.
This is a direct result of deliberate misinformation that's being spread through social media. The government is not making COVID-19 or any other vaccinations compulsory. We will, of course, when we have a vaccination available, be encouraging people to take the vaccination because it will help to keep everybody safe.
Cabinet meets at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning and is expected to announce any changes to New Zealand's alert levels in the afternoon. I tāmaki makaurau o te hōtaka o te ahi nei ko Jean Bell DNA.
And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, what happens when you get sick with something other than COVID-19 in managed isolation? Germany says there is now unequivocal proof a Russian opposition politician was poisoned with a Novichok nerve agent. And National kicks off its socially distanced election campaign and pledges $3,000 for all new parents. But is it the cash kind of money? We would love your feedback on schools, whether you're sending your kids at the moment, and also anything else that's on your mind from the program so far this evening. 2101 is the text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us at Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's get to the headlines now with Susanna.
The Green Party's spokesperson on animal welfare says the incident in the East China Sea shows New Zealand must stop exporting livestock for breeding. A cargo ship has gone missing during a typhoon with 40 people on board, including 2 New Zealanders, and nearly 6,000 cattle. It's believed to have been hit by a wave and capsized. 1 person has been rescued so far. Gareth Hughes told Checkpoint the animals suffer from distress for weeks at sea and many farmers don't feel it's even economic. Up to 200 jobs are on the line as New Zealand Steel restructures its business. Its Chief Executive, Greta Stevens, says the mill would keep making its top-selling colour steel, but loss-making products would be cut. It will continue steel making at its Glenbrook mill. The Prime Minister is defending the government's progress in tackling child poverty following a low UNICEF ranking. The UN Children's Agency has put New Zealand 35th out of the 41 most developed countries in terms of the well-being of children. Jacinda Ardern says progress is happening, but the previous government's underinvestment means it will take time to improve children's lives. The Director of Auckland Regional Public Health is confident the current COVID-19 outbreak has already reached its peak. There is just 1 new case in the community today and another in managed isolation. Dr. William Ranger says evidence suggests the epidemic curve peaked 2 weeks ago and the overall trend is downwards. Some medical centres have been forced to close today after more than 3,000 primary care nurses and administration staff went on strike. One nurse who joined a picket at Parliament, Jude Cairns, says it's not fair that nurses at DHBs with the same qualifications and experience are paid up to $7,000 more. A handful of firefighters remain on the scene in Mangere following a large blaze at the Maui Campervans headquarters this morning. 3 crews are continuing to monitor the building to catch any possible hotspots. The building was almost completely gutted by the fire. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. And it's time now for the business news with Nicholas Poynton. Nicholas, some more grim news you've got for us in business. New Zealand Steel is planning a restructure. What does that mean for jobs?
Yeah, so this is some news that came out literally just in the past hour and a half. And just quickly running through some of those headline numbers. New Zealand Steel says it's going to undergo this restructure of its operations. It could see between 150 and 200 jobs axed. It does have a total workforce of about 1,400. It will keep its steel mill in Glenbrook, just north of Auckland, and where it's going to continue to produce its very high-yielding, highly profitable colour steel range. But it's some of those less profitable products that they manufacture that they're going to sort of move away from. And to be fair, this news that we're getting from New Zealand Steel, it's sort of been on the cards for a wee while now. So the company that owns them, it's an Australian company called BlueScope, they posted their result on the ASX last month and it was pretty ugly. It posted a $6 million operating loss. It also wrote down the value of its business by about 200 million Australian dollars. And at the time when it put out this announcement, it did signal that its New Zealand operations were on a knife edge, and they could actually close down the steel mill in Glenbrook. So if there's one positive to sort of take out of this, it's the fact that the steel mill in Glenbrook is going to stick around. They're not going to remove that. They say that the reason why they've decided to make this move is really just they're struggling with lower prices. They're not really making that much money. They've suffered due to COVID-related closures. There's high energy and raw material costs. And we're sort of hearing the same things we heard out of TY when they announced their closure about 2 months ago. So they say that the next step from here on in is that they're going to begin that consultation process with the staff who are going to be most affected by this decision.
Yeah, I suppose if they've got a workforce of 1,400, up to 200 is a big chunk of them. Let's move to Sky City. So, their result, full year result. Yeah, interesting. Tell us about that.
Yeah, this was a sort of a tough result. I have to admit, I did struggle to sort of get my head around this result. It was a funny old one. I should mention that their result was boosted by the $340 million that it got in a payout from their insurance company as a result of the convention fire that was in the news a lot last year. Its reported net profit for the year was $235 million. That also includes some big one-off asset sales, but its normalised profit, this is the number you want to pay attention to. This is where they remove all those one-off gains, they strip those numbers out. There was actually 60% less than last year. That was at $66 million. Its revenue for the year ended June was down 40% as they've really been hit hard by these COVID-19 restrictions. And to put into perspective how hard they have been hit, the most recent restrictions we've just had, that 2.5 weeks, the company says it lost $30 million in 2.5 weeks because they had to close. So
because they're relying on backsides on seats, and also one assumes, and looking very quickly at the result as I did, because the borders have closed, a lot of the high rollers are tourists or visitors.
Yeah, exactly. They do make a lot of money from those international high rollers. They spend a lot of money at the hotel, and they also spend a lot of money down at the tables. So yeah, that's one area where they're going to have to really adjust in this sort of post-COVID economy that we're now in. Just getting to some other numbers from the result, they also wrote down the value of their Adelaide casino by about $160 million. So they have taken, the company says they've been very swift in their response to the pandemic. They received over $30 million from the government with regard to the wage subsidy scheme. They went to the share market, they raised $230 million there. They also went to their bank and they extended their banking facilities, took on $160 million worth of new debt. So that sort of really says a lot about how this company, how they're responding to this pandemic. They're really looking to bolster the balance sheet and make sure that they've got money going forward. The CEO says that domestic business, that's going to be the future. They're going to have to lean into this. They're going to have to really attract New Zealanders to come to Auckland, to stay at this hotel, to come down to the casino and gamble money. And they say, looking ahead to the future, there's not going to be any more further redundancies. To date, they've laid off 1,000 people, and they're also, and I guess a positive sign that they're saying that they're talking up is that their online casino operation. Now, this is actually based in Malta for legal reasons. They think this is going to be a significant revenue earner in the future. And I think the logic behind that is with the prospect of more lockdowns, those people who do like to gamble might have to start doing it online.
Okay, interesting. Let's take a whip around the markets.
So yeah, the NZX Top 50, if you remember at the beginning of the week, it sort of began to take a tumble because of this. A lot of investors were unsure about what's going to come out of Australia's sort of Reserve Bank announcement. Well, today it's slowly edging towards its record high again. It's up 1.2%, or about 152 points to 12,055. Our dollar is down by about 1/3% to 67.5 US cents. Still really, really strong. And it's steady at both 92.2 Australian and 50.6 British pence. And gold, it's down again, $1,938 US an ounce.
Oh, your gold is not faring well, Nicholas. And that's Nicholas Poynton with our business update. Hundreds of A&E centres and GP clinics across the country have been affected by strike action by more than 3,000 primary care nurses today. Lunchtime rallies took place in Wellington and Christchurch, and nurses were joined by striking administration staff who are also calling on the government to step in after mediation with employers failed. Ruth Hill joined protesters at Parliament.
They have the same qualifications and the same level of experience, but nurses working in GP clinics and elsewhere in the community take home up to $7,650 less in their pay packets each year than DHB nurses. Nurses Organisation spokesperson Suzanne Rolls, who was at the protest outside the Beehive, says talks with employers have dragged on all year, but only the government has the power to end the stalemate.
We've worked it out to be about 15 million, and that will enable our members to get parity with our other members in district health boards.
The union says while some clinics are giving their staff pay parity, not every clinic can afford it, and the sector is already grappling with a growing problem with recruitment and retention. Former DHB nurse Jude Kearns says it's grossly unfair.
I worked at Capital Coast for 29 years in major hospitals, and I'd say that out in the general practice we work harder than we do than hospital nurses. We get paid so much less and we work so much harder.
New mum Georgia Chavot, who brought her 6-week son Joseph to the protest, says she's worried about the future.
As a new parent, making sure that me and my son have great access to community health and wellbeing is really important, and I know that the nurses aren't paid enough to keep us well.
The Senior Doctors Union is throwing its support behind the nurses. Association of Salaried Medical Specialists Executive Director Sarah Dalton says the financial problems at Canterbury DHB and the fact many rural and iwi-based practices cannot make ends meet show the whole system is under pressure.
It doesn't matter where you work, which healthcare setting, you deserve to have decent paying conditions, and it's patently unjust that if you choose to work in a community setting, you're going to be paid worse than your colleagues who are working in a hospital. We need all of those kinds of healthcare.
Sarah Dalton says all healthcare funding ultimately comes out of the same pot, but it's time for a serious conversation about just how big that pot should be and what New Zealanders can expect from a publicly funded health system. For Checkpoint, Ruth Hill.
And, well, one woman in isolation was told just hang in there and give it some time. That was the advice she got in managed isolation when she was suffering from excruciating pain, vomiting and crying for days. Josephine, a New Zealander who returned from Sydney on August 26th, was a few days into her stint at the Grand Millennium when her impacted wisdom teeth became infected. Her gums became swollen and painful and her whole body started to ache. She told Bridget Burke the staff have been pureeing her food so she can eat, but when she asked for urgent medical help, she was told she'd have to wait till her 2 weeks isolation is over.
Since then, they've had me on medication just to try and manage the pain, and every time I've kind of talked to them about how it's getting worse, they've just sort of told me to hang in there.
Who did you talk to, Josephine, about the pain?
Just like different nurses from downstairs. They just said to try and hold it in there and take the medication until I leave. And I've only just been able to eat like mashed food that they pureed for me.
So staff at the managed isolation facility have pureed food for you because of your pain?
Yeah.
Were you able to ask to go and see a dentist?
They said that I can't leave the isolation until...
So you're in severe pain and they wouldn't let you organise a dentist appointment?
Yeah. So it got really bad to the point where I couldn't eat, and I just couldn't move my mouth or jaw for a while after it happened. They had to puree food for me. I'm currently just eating mashed potato and pureed vegetables.
And did you have any other side effects of the pain in your gums?
I wake up and I'm needing to vomit. I've been vomiting. My body's sore, aching all over, and I've been having shortness of breath.
And you've been tested for COVID as well, and that's been...
Yeah, I've been tested and it's come back negative. They've tested me twice now.
Were you begging them to let you go and get some urgent dental help?
I've been asking. I've asked them, because I told them that it's really painful and I need something, they need to do something, and they've just told me that there's nothing they can do and that I should just take the pain. And I think today someone said that sometimes I just have to come to terms with the fact that things take time, was what someone said to me today.
This is a staff member at the managed isolation?
One of the nurses.
One of the nurses just told you, just to give it time?
Yeah, just to come to terms with the fact that it takes time. But now the nurses came upstairs and said that they're going to get a doctor to see me first before I go to hospital.
Why the sudden change of heart? Because they were telling you before that you had to wait till the end of your 2-week managed isolation stint in order to seek help. Why have they changed their mind about getting you some medical attention?
I think it's one of my good friends has been calling the Healthline and calling the Ministry of Health representative here. I've also talked to my mum and I've also been calling them, and I think now I've been talking to other, the Healthline as well, and they finally now just decided to take some steps. I understand it's a pandemic and everything like that, but I also it makes me question it, whether or not I'm not the only person that's constantly in pain, and they've just been making wait. So I really don't think it's acceptable.
Have you been able to hear of anybody else in there that's had problems that you know of, or it's just...
They talked to me about someone before me that needed a dental emergency and was able to get it. So that's why I'm confused as to why I can't.
Did they not believe you?
I don't think so. I don't know if they believe me or not. They just seem to be dragging it out.
Do you think it's possible they didn't understand the gravity of your pain?
I think so. The majority of the time that I've explained everything, they just seem to think that it's COVID symptoms.
Right. Josephine, when the nurse told you just to hang in there and give it a bit of time, how did you feel about that advice?
Just ignored. I'm already in pain. It's been 2 days. They've told me 2 days ago to take the medication and wait until it's done. And I've taken medication for the 2 days that they've told me to take it, and it's still painful. I'm not really a crying person, but yesterday I did call my mum having a cry about everything.
Checkpoint has sought comment from MIQ and the Ministry of Health. The Prime Minister wants New Zealand to be the best place in the world to grow up, but UNICEF's latest child wellbeing rankings have the country among the worst performing in the developed world. Jacinda Ardern insists progress is being made, and she points out that some of the data used in the damning UNICEF report is out of date. But organisations on the front line say progress has been slow, and in some cases things are actually getting worse. Here's our social issues reporter Sarah Robson.
Of the 41 OECD and European countries surveyed, New Zealand ranked 35th for overall child wellbeing. On mental wellbeing alone, New Zealand sits at 38th, with the youth suicide rate among the worst in the developed world. Jazz Thornton is one of the co-founders of Voices of Hope, a not-for-profit trying to break the stigma around mental health.
We are seeing young people across the country struggling and, struggling to speak up and struggling to access the help that they need.
The UNICEF report put the suicide rate for 15 to 19-year-olds at 14.9 per 100,000 adolescents, averaging data from the 3 years to 2015. Figures released last month by the Chief Coroner put the 2019 rate for that age group at 18.7 per 100,000 adolescents. Jazz Thornton says more action is needed.
I think that there has been a lot of talk, a lot of promises, a lot of funding that has been allocated to services within mental health, but we're yet to see a lot of that actually actioned and spent. And I think that talking about it is fantastic, and talking about it is one step, but in order to see actual tangible change that sees our statistics decrease, then we have to action what we're saying.
Denise Kingi-Uluave is the Chief Executive of LEVA, an organisation supporting Pacifica families. She says the findings in a UNICEF report aren't surprising and show depression and anxiety are on the rise.
Rates of significant symptoms of depression and suicide attempts are particularly high for young people living in high deprivation neighbourhoods, and the impact of these hardships is especially evident in our Māori and Pacific communities.
And Denise Kingi-Uluave says services need to gear up to be able to deal with the long-term impacts of the pandemic on young people.
We need to have services that can meet those needs, and unfortunately, historically we've invested mainly in mental health services that serve our top 3% of the population who are most unwell. What we need to do now is make sure that we have a focus on early intervention and prevention.
New Zealand also ranked poorly on physical health, with the second worst childhood obesity rates in the OECD. The figures from 2016 showed close to 40% of 5 to 19-year-olds were overweight or obese. The most recent health survey for 2018-19 shows 31% of children aged between 2 and 14 are overweight or obese. Dave Letele is from BBM Motivation, an organisation in South Auckland focused on helping whānau live healthier lives. He doubts the statistics have got any better.
I see it every day. On the ground, we see it all the time. And in the most deprived areas, it's just getting worse and worse and worse.
Dave Letele says when money's tight, it can be hard for families to make healthy choices.
The parent, if they're working, they're probably on minimum wage. They're time poor. They're bombarded with fast food. They're targeted with fast food advertising. Look around in Mangere, in any of the poor areas, there's fast food chains, there's liquor stores. Everything bad is there, and it's cheap.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says the UNICEF report predates a number of her government's policies aimed at improving the well-being of children. But she says it will take some time to turn the statistics around.
Our job will not be done until we actually, as a country, see children out of poverty altogether. We are, relative to many other countries, a country that is wealthy enough to be able to achieve that goal. We do need, however, more than 3 years to achieve it.
UNICEF says more needs to be done to reduce child poverty, but Jacinda Ardern says the most recent official statistics show improvements in 7 of the 9 measures of child poverty. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
It is 8 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback. Let us know what you think about the potential shift in alert levels tomorrow. Are we ready to progress downwards in those levels? Also, a lot of you getting in touch about livestock exports. Let us know what you think. We'll get to some of those a little later in the program. You can text 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Germany says there is now unequivocal proof that Russian opposition politician Alexei Navalny was poisoned with a Novichok nerve agent. Chancellor Angela Merkel says Mr. Navalny is a victim of attempted murder and says the world will look to Russia for answers. The prominent Kremlin critic was flown to Berlin after falling ill on a flight in Siberia last month and remains in a coma. His team says he was poisoned on President Vladimir Putin's orders. The Kremlin has dismissed the allegation. And the BBC's Gordon Carrera filed this report.
Alexei Navalny has been the most prominent opposition figure in Russia, campaigning against corruption. A thorn in the Kremlin's side, he's been arrested and had his offices raided. But soon after being pictured drinking tea at a Siberian airport in August, he fell suddenly and violently ill on a flight to Moscow. Russian doctors said there was no sign of foul play and his blood sugar had simply dropped. But amidst growing pressure, he was airlifted to Berlin, where he remains in a coma. And today Angela Merkel revealed he'd been poisoned with a Novichok nerve agent.
We expect the Russian government to give an explanation. There are now grave questions which only the Russian government can and must answer.
Novichok is the same type of nerve agent used in Salisbury in 2018. Secretly developed by Moscow in the Cold War, Western intelligence believe it was turned into a tool for assassination and smeared on a door handle belonging to former Russian spy Sergei Skripal, poisoning him and his daughter in Salisbury. They survived, but a local woman, Dawn Sturgis, was killed months later when she picked up a discarded perfume bottle used to transport the agent. The use of such a rare substance was crucial then and now in pointing the finger at the Russian state.
Well, on the face of it, it would appear that they just don't care who knows. This is directly leading to the Russians. They're the only ones who've ever made this stuff. They're the only ones we've ever known who've used it before. And the other thing to consider, it took 18 months to clean up Salisbury. If this stuff is lying around the airport where he was poisoned or his hotel, there's a huge threat to the local population.
Today's revelation strengthens the evidence Alexei Navalny was targeted by the Russian state. The question now is how the international community will respond.
And that was the BBC's Gordon Carrera. We have an update here from Reuters. This is on the Gulf Livestock One ship that is missing in the East China Sea. 43 crew members on board and 6,000 cattle. They were heading to China, 2 New Zealanders there as well, caught in a typhoon. It says that Japan's Coast Guard has rescued 1 crew member, a 45-year-old chief officer from the Philippines, and that was on Wednesday night while they were searching for the ship. According to the chief officer, the ship lost an engine before it was hit by a wave and capsized, says a Coast Guard spokesperson. When the ship capsized, the crew member says they were all instructed to put on their life jackets, and he jumped into the water and did not see any other crew members before he was rescued. That's an update from the Reuters news service on the Gulf Livestock One, which is missing in the East China Sea. Let's head to the States now, and whether or not President Trump's apparent tough stance on law and order resonates with voters will be one of the key factors that determines whether or not he is re-elected in November. He'll be hoping for a repeat performance in key battleground states, including the crucial Ohio. CNN's Jeb Zelalny is there and has spoken to suburban voters.
President Trump is seizing on the suburbs as a weapon in his fight with Joe Biden.
You will totally destroy the beautiful suburbs. Suburbia will be no longer.
But here in Ohio, these sprawling communities have long been changing. Just ask Angie Jenkins.
I have no idea what he's talking about because the suburbs are not what they were in the 60s.
Jenkins is the new city council president of Reynoldsburg, just outside Columbus. She and 2 other black women were elected last year, in part, she believes, as a reaction to Trump.
I do feel like he's trying to put fear in people, but people know what we've had for the last 4 years and what he has been as a president.
9 weeks before Election Day, the suburbs are again a critical part of battleground Ohio, a state Trump won in 2016 by 8 percentage points. This time, front yards showing new signs of division, from All Lives Matter to Black Lives Matter, from Trump to Biden, often on the same block. Ed Paxton owns a cigar shop in the nearby town of Delaware.
Some people love him, some people hate him.
His view of Trump has improved over the last 4 years and believes the president's law and order message will resonate with some voters in both camps.
It is Trump's America. But I think at a local level, our law enforcement has been handcuffed.
John Murphy, an iron worker who dropped by to pick up a cigar, disagrees. He says the summer unrest is justified.
When people are dying for no reason other than the color of their skin, they have a right to be angry.
You think President Trump's trying to scare people?
Absolutely. I think that's his main tactic.
Stephanie Pizer believes the scare tactics won't work, particularly on women awakened to politics because of Trump.
It's pretty obvious what the future's going to look like under Trump, which scares a lot of women.
After Trump won in 2016, she helped form a group in the Republican-leaning suburbs called Positively Blue, recruiting women to run for local office and become more politically aware.
We're not going to convert any Trump supporters, but finding those people that are on the fence, the independents, and Republicans that are just fed up with the way that our country's been run.
Not long ago, many Democrats believed the state was out of reach, but the coronavirus crisis and economic fallout changed that. Plus, Biden is a known quantity after being a partner on the Obama ticket that twice carried Ohio. That's why the Trump campaign is trying to rebrand Biden. Among some Republicans, at least, it may be working.
The Democratic Party is not what it used to be, and it's extremely liberal, and I think it's scary.
And that report by CNN's Jeb Zeleny. News just to hand, the Ministry for Primary Industries has temporarily suspended consideration of cattle livestock exports.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata tēnei. An Australian-based vet says the disappearance of the livestock ship near Japan emphasises the risks involved in shipments of live animals. The vessel, Gulf Livestock One, which was sailing from Napier to China, went missing off the coast of Japan after being caught in a typhoon. It had more than 40 people on board, including 2 New Zealanders. It's believed to have had engine failure and capsized after being hit by a wave. One seaman was found drifting in rough waters in a life jacket. Lynn Simpson, who has worked as a vet on 57 voyages, says as a ship nears the end of its journey, it can become top-heavy.
So as the voyage continues, the animals are consuming the fodder and the ship is consuming the fuel. So any weight that was down below, which sort of acts as a heavy ballast and keeps the ship generally, more stable, is then used up and basically gone.
Lynn Simpson says ships tend not to avoid bad weather because it involves using more fuel. And just to hand, the Ministry for Primary Industries has temporarily suspended consideration of all applications to export live cattle. Some Auckland schools have less than half their roll turning up each day, despite the city's move to COVID alert level 2.5, and the Education Minister repeatedly reassuring parents. Just 53% of pupils at Mount Roskill Primary were in classes today. Its principal, Mike O'Reilly, says there are plenty of nervous parents in the community.
People are being cautious around the general COVID situation. That's what we're hearing. They're still not sure. They're still a bit worried. I don't know if they feel as informed as they might be. Many of our families don't speak English that well.
At Dawson Primary in Ōtara and Sutton Park School in Māngere East, only about 40% of pupils have returned. Public health officials in Auckland are confident the current COVID-19 outbreak is being contained. There are 2 new cases today, one in the community linked to the Auckland cluster and one in managed isolation. Of the 115 current active cases, 79 are in the community. The Director of Auckland Regional Public Health, Dr William Ranger, says the case numbers and the epidemiological evidence suggest the epidemic peaked about 2 weeks ago.
It is undulating downwards. We've had the Mount Roskill Church congregation, which has given a little spike, but the direction of travel is downwards.
And the country will find out tomorrow whether there will be any changes to the COVID-19 alert levels. Auckland is at level 2.5 while the rest of the country remains at level 2. Cabinet will meet at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning and make an announcement in the afternoon. The Prime Minister says Cabinet will err on the side of caution. Legal action is being taken against a community health company accused of failing to give staff their entitled breaks and correct pay. The PSA union has filed a case against Access Community Health with the Employment Relations Authority. The union's Kerry Davies says more than 1,000 of the home support workers employed by Access have had their collective agreement continuously breached.
And in particular, this relates to the hours of work clause and the failure for the employer access to provide regular and guaranteed hours of work, and also failure to provide even 10-minute breaks.
Access Community Health has been approached for comment. A mental health advocate says more action is needed if New Zealand wants to turn around its woeful youth suicide statistics. A new UNICEF report puts it among the worst performing developed countries when it comes to the mental well-being of children. Jazz Thornton from the group Voices of Hope says there are a lot of young people who are struggling to get the help they need. She says promises have been made and funding has been allocated to improve services.
But we're yet to see a lot of that actually actioned and spent. And I think that talking about it is fantastic, and talking about it is one step. But in order to see actual tangible change that sees our statistics decrease, then we have to action what we're saying.
Jazz Thornton from Voices of Hope. The Darfield War Memorial will be lit up tonight ahead of the 10-year anniversary of the earthquake that struck close by at Greendale. The 7.2 magnitude quake on a previously hidden fault line under the Canterbury Plains that caused widespread damage around the region. However, despite the quake hitting just after 4:30 in the morning, when most people were tucked up in bed, no one was hit by falling masonry, and the quake did not claim a single life. Commemorative events in Darfield have had to be cancelled due to COVID-19 crowd limits. It's 5 minutes past 6. Aaron Major is leaving the Highlanders after 3 years as coach. Under his guidance, the Highlanders made the Super Rugby playoffs in 2018 and 2019 and finished fourth this year in Super Rugby Aotearoa. The Highlanders have given no indication of a replacement, but the current assistant coach, Tony Brown, appears to be an obvious candidate. Sonny Bill Williams admits he has a few nerves ahead of his much-anticipated return to the NRL on Saturday. The 35-year-old former All Black, who last played in the National Rugby League in 2014, will come off the Sydney Roosters bench for their match against the Canberra Raiders. Williams told Channel 9 that while not as fit as he might want, he's ready to go.
My name's on the team sheet, mate, so if I wasn't ready to go, I wouldn't be there, would I? Anyone that says that they don't have nerves as a sportsman or woman is probably lying, and I'm no different.
Sonny Bill Williams. The former Silver Fern defender, 37-year-old Anna Harrison, is coming out of retirement to play in next year's ANZ Netball Premiership. Harrison has signed with the Northern Stars for 2021, along with Silver Fern's mid-quarter Gina Crampton, who was part of New Zealand's World Cup winning side last year. New Zealand basketballer Stephen Adams' Oklahoma City Thunder have been eliminated from the NBA playoffs after losing the deciding seventh game, 104-102 to the Houston Rockets in their Western Conference Series. That's the news.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
Probably New Zealanders know more about Waterloo and Trafalgar than battles that happened in Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Live with local, national and international stories as they happen.
If you see that headline and you're all familiar with internet conspiracy theories, it will raise a whole clamour of alarm bells.
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Fine weather, but areas of cloud developing tomorrow night. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, cloudy periods and occasional showers north of Wairoa, becoming fine tomorrow morning. Horowhenua to Wellington, fine tonight, cloud developing tomorrow with showers about the Tararua range from the afternoon. Nelson, Marlborough and northern Canterbury, fine tonight, high cloud developing tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, fine tonight, cloud and drizzle developing tomorrow, turning to rain with brief heavy falls in Westland from the afternoon. Fiordland, light showers, turning to heavy rain tomorrow morning, easing to showers at night. Southern Canterbury, Otago and Southland, fine tonight, scattered rain spreading north from tomorrow afternoon with heavy falls about the headwaters. And Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with isolated showers tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Politicians were back on the road today after a false start to the election campaign, and National is promising a big spend up on young mums. Under its proposal, all pregnant women would be given $3,000, but not in cash. Our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch, explains.
Judith Collins back on the campaign trail, but with a new socially distant style.
Thank you for all sitting a long way away from each other. Now, when you're doing this, don't blame Auckland, will you? Blame the people who messed up at the border.
This is campaigning under Alert Level 2. The national leader holding court at a spaced-out meeting in Timaru, her first since the return of COVID-19.
We'll do what we say and we will get it done, just like little Horton, the elephant. Remember him from Dr. Seuss? Says we're not Maisie, we're more like Horton. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day.
Then from children's books to children's policy, National using day one of the campaign to debut a new promise. $3,000 for all new parents for use over the first 1,000 days of their child's life. Double that for the 10% of parents deemed at highest risk. It's not cash, but a sort of payment scheme to be used in specific ways, perhaps as extra parental leave, specialist support, or early childhood education.
I mean, I just think about how tough it is for a first-time mum to deal with things like milk coming in and stitches and things and all that, and not knowing what you're doing and being in charge of a teeny-weeny little baby.
The package is costed at nearly $200 million a year. The current Best Start payment of $60 a week, put in by the current government, would continue, but National would make it means-tested.
I'm very proud of the record that we've had on supporting families.
No new policy from Labour or Jacinda Ardern today, barely even a response to National's proposal. Labour wouldn't front its social development spokesperson, Carmel Sepuloni, delivering only a late written statement, which said little more than National can't be trusted.
Of course, we'll use the campaign period to announce any new policy in these areas, but that extension of paid parental leave, that Best Start payment, families will already know how strongly we feel about supporting those early years.
Instead of traditional campaigning today, Ms Ardern put on her prime ministerial hat to open a new construction training centre in Auckland. She'll keep it on tomorrow as she meets with cabinet ministers to discuss whether to shift alert levels. The country's ongoing pandemic response means Ms Ardern will jump between her two roles more frequently than in the usual run-up to an election. COVID-19 changing the campaign in more ways than one. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
A huge fire near Auckland Airport this morning has destroyed the office of a campervan business and several campervans. Richard Pearce Drive and surrounding roads were closed, causing heavy traffic congestion, while nearby businesses and residents were told to close their windows to avoid breathing the acrid smoke. Fortunately, the nearby quarantine facility, the Jet Park Hotel, didn't need to be evacuated. Matthew Tunison reports.
The 100 by 80 metre Maui Auckland headquarters was almost completely gutted by the fire, which broke out at around 5 o'clock this morning. 19 fire crews and upwards of 70 firefighters were there at the height of the blaze, which went to the highest alert, fifth alarm. Here's Incident Controller Richard Toomey.
When first crews got here, the building had a large fire at the rear, which has quickly spread through the building. As you can see, it's a large building, nearly 80 metres by 100 metres. There was camper vans and various workshops and things inside the building.
Firefighters managed to recover some of the camper vans at the site, which already had the keys inside, but about a dozen were destroyed. Some businesses were evacuated, including the Fitness 24/7 gym next door. Staff member Grace Mitchell didn't notice what was going on until shortly before 6:30 a.m.
We didn't know that it started earlier. We had a class going on, so it was extra loud in the gym. We're just like, oh, there's some lights outside. Oh, there's heaps of smoke. So I spoke to one of the firemen just to get some more information on how serious it was. And they did inform me to get everybody to vacate. I was quite worried for the gym at one point.
Grant Webster, chief executive of THL, which owns Maui Campervans, called it a severe emotional blow to staff, some of whom have been working there for decades, and a massive operational challenge.
So the building itself, we would expect needs to be demolished. That's been written off, total loss. A number of vehicles, total loss, probably, thankfully, only around a dozen. And then we've got to assess what other smoke and heat damage has been caused to the rest of the fleet on site.
Richard Toomey says the flames were out by about 8:30 a.m, but with smoke still billowing from the smouldering skeleton, crews still had some work to do.
We've knocked the actual fire. There's going to be little hot spots that are going to take a few hours to get on top of, so still parts of the building we're not prepared to put our crews in at the moment just due to the structural integrity of the building.
Fire investigators are working to establish the cause. In Auckland for Checkpoint, call Matthew Tunis and TNA.
It's official. We've had our hottest winter on record, according to NIWA data. So what does that mean for springtime or even summer? NIWA forecaster Chris Brandolino has all the answers and he joins me now. Good evening, Chris. So tell me, what does the hottest winter on record look and feel like?
Kia ora, Lisa. Look, it feels like something that's remarkable. I mean, you know, we can throw numbers at you. Numbers will certainly paint a picture, but let's add some context. So, yeah, warmest winter on record. It was 1.1 degrees warmer, 1.14 if you want to be a purist, warmer than the long-term average. Okay, so that's the national temperature. We use a 7-station anomaly or 7-station series to kind of describe Aotearoa's temperature as a whole for the country. So, well, what does that mean? Well, think about this. 7 out of the 10 warmest winters, that's 7 out of the 10 warmest winters have occurred since the year 2000, okay? And I'll throw this at you. There were about 70, maybe just a touch over 70 locations across New Zealand, north to south, that either had a warmest winter on record or a near warmest winter on record. Guess how many locations had a coldest winter on record or a near coldest winter on record?
Oh, let me say 3.
0. So that really puts in context how unusually warm it was, not just for certain locations, but from top to bottom, 70 locations, record or near record warmth. So, and you know, if you unless you timed your skiing holiday just right, you probably really saw that in the slopes, you know, the lack of snow.
So what is happening here then, especially when you give us that figure of the time frame for the hottest winters on record? It's all happened in relatively short form. So are we talking global warming here?
Oh, well, of course, that's always a part of the puzzle. But, you know, before the internet explodes and sends hate email or tweets, let's put this in, again, context here. Warm years, warm seasons, warm days have always happened, always will. You know, in terms of what happened this past winter, our ocean temperatures were unusually warm. And as an island nation, we basically are in lockstep with our ocean temperatures. If our ocean temperatures are warmer than usual, there's a really good chance our air temperatures are going to follow suit. Also, wind direction, very simple. When you boil things down, where's the air coming from? Is it predominantly coming from a cold place? Is it predominantly coming from a warm place? Had a lot of northeasterly winds this past winter. That's a pretty warm place. And you throw in a lot of high pressure and sunshine, and then you throw in the tailwind, climate change. Look, you know, grass will grow by itself. But if you throw on fertilizer, it grows more robustly, more quickly, more vigorously. So warm periods will happen by themselves. But when you take the same warm period that we just had, right, and if you were to place that 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 50 years from now, you're going to get a warmer result. Same natural conditions, but because the Earth is warming, you get a warmer result.
Hey, we love numbers here on Checkpoint, so can you give us some of the highlights, some of the lowlights, and what was the worst place to be?
Well, in terms of the winter season,
yeah.
I can tell you that, well, the most unusually warm place for the winter season as a whole, just glancing through my notes here, was down on the South Island. The location that had the warmest, most unusual daytime temperature was 3.1 degrees, and the warmest nighttime temperature, 2.3 degrees. So it's Farewell Spit. That was a location that had the most unusually warm temperature when you compare it to history, the long-term average. When you look at places like Auckland, for example, we had our second warmest winter. You head down to, because I'm based in Auckland, I say we, head down to Wellington, the fourth warmest winter down at the airport. And a lot of places were dry. This is something that has our attention. So a lot of places in the South Island had a very dry winter, and the soils are unusually dry for the time of year. And that's something we're going to have to watch as we head into the spring season. Those northeasterly winds, Lisa, I spoke of, that was in line with the emerging climate driver called La Nina. What's a climate driver? Put simply, a lot of people in their car right now, I imagine, heading home from work. A climate driver is who is sitting at the steering wheel of Mother Nature's car, because that's going to tell you which direction you're going to go. And La Nina is a climate driver, and that's emerging in the tropical Pacific. Hasn't quite fully emerged yet, but it's in that process. And as a consequence, a lot of northeast winds. In the springtime, that typically equates to, or at least favors, historically drier than usual conditions for the lower portion of the North Island and for much of the South Island. And that's one thing we're watching down in the South Island. The soils are unusually dry. Irrigation season may start early. We got to wait for those soils to get about 10 Celsius. That's what really starts to spur and sustain plant growth, or the soils get that warm. And that will happen. And once that happens, they need water. And how do people water? Well, either comes from the sky, irrigation, things like that. So we've got to watch the conditions down across the South Island, because if the irrigation starts soon, that's something that bears watching, especially if we don't get a lot of rain during springtime.
Yeah, and also Aucklanders who are having 4-minute showers or less will be watching the rainfall as well. So does drier mean warmer? What are your predictions for summer?
Well, it's a bit premature to go into summer, but I can tell you that with La Nina, I'll say it like this. La Nina summers historically tend to be warm. Why? Our ocean temperatures tend to be warm. Our ocean temperatures, as I mentioned earlier, are running quite unusually warm around our coast, around our immediate coastline. And also, they are unusually warm out across the Tasman Sea. And during La Ninas, which I mentioned we're going toward, historically, those ocean temperatures are warm during spring, which is why we think with high confidence spring will be warmer. And they also are typically warmer in the summer season. A couple of years ago, the last La Nina event, we had a marine heat wave. A marine heat wave is basically a sustained period where the waters are highly unusually warm, just boiling it down quite simply. So if our waters are going to be warm, right, for spring and maybe even summer, that tips the odds toward a warmer than usual spring, and for that to persist into summer. Now, it's certainly not our official outlook, but if you're trying to deduce, how are things lining up? And with northeast winds, that's a warm wind direction. Northeast winds also quite warm for the South Island, because they're heading pretty much parallel to the coast, parallel to the land. You're getting some warming effects as air moves over the land. So, it's early, of course, and we will issue our official summer outlook in late November. But, yeah, that's how things are lining up in terms of, the next 3 months and even beyond.
Thanks, Chris. We'll hold you to your predictions. That's the NIWA forecaster, Chris Brandolino there. And it was our hottest winter on record, according to their official data. It is 21 minutes past 6, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And just to update you on the position of MPI, the Ministry for Primary Industries, on live cattle stock exports. They have released a statement. It says the Ministry for Primary Industries has temporarily suspended consideration of cattle stock export applications after a vessel transporting stock from New Zealand to China went missing off the coast of Japan. MPI wants to understand what happened on the sailing of the Gulf Livestock 1. And this is obviously the vessel that has 43 crew on it, 2 New Zealanders included, and almost 6,000 cattle. Now, the Green Party want livestock exports to be banned for good, not just while this is investigated. And a lot of you are in agreement. Some of your feedback here. This listener says, absolutely against live exports of animals for any purpose, an outdated, cruel and morally wrong practice. I will never understand or support it. Judith says livestock shipments have had numerous difficulties over the years. It is time that this trade is stopped. It has been rendered unnecessary by sale of genetic material overseas rather than live animals. And this one says, very sorry for the loss of human lives, but as an animal lover, I was upset when I heard that thousands of cattle were being live exported recently. To hear today they may have all drowned makes me mad as hell. I call on the government to immediately ban any further livestock exports. That's from Tony. But this one in from a listener totally other side of the coin, says, I have been a stockman on a ship to China. I am also a professional farmer for 40 years. The stock is excellently cared for on the ship, well fed and watered, as well as temperature controlled. We had 3,000 cows and all cows arrived in excellent health in China. So just to restate there, temporary ban on live exports at the moment. The Cumid government has imposed a nighttime curfew in the capital, Havana, as authorities struggle to contain a new outbreak of the coronavirus. People have been ordered to stay in their homes at night for 2 weeks. The BBC's Will Grant is in Havana.
Havana is under curfew. Not by day, as people still venture out to find food or in some cases continue to go to work. But at night, the streets of the Cuban capital are completely deserted. From 7 p.m. till 5 a.m. for at least the next 2 weeks, people must remain in their homes as the authorities attempt to bring this latest outbreak of coronavirus back under control. Now, Cuba had been praised for its response to COVID-19 and for containing its local infection rates. Indeed, in one day in July, they registered no deaths and no new infections. However, since then, they've gradually seen the numbers creep up, which has forced the communist-run government into these latest measures. They include a halt on national tourism, and only certain vehicles are allowed to circulate the streets. The governments say that people welcome these stringent new measures as they want to see the outbreak brought back under control. But on the streets, they were greeted with mixed emotions.
The queues are much longer than the supplies available in the stores. If they carry on only stocking some stores in Havana with food and not all of them, then people will keep flocking to those shops. It will be terrible and COVID will keep spreading.
There are many basic goods which aren't available everywhere. I think all neighbourhoods must be treated equally to avoid problems of too many people crowding around the same place.
The curfew measures are good. I agree that they're necessary, but I don't agree with the rule that says we can only buy products in our local neighbourhoods. Some of us have spent hours queuing for nothing.
As well as the nighttime curfew, residents of Havana can only purchase goods in their own municipalities, something which complicates matters for many, especially those living in the poorest neighbourhoods. Now, it's worth remembering that even at its height, Cuba's coronavirus outbreak is far more controlled than those in hotspots in the region like Brazil and Mexico. Nevertheless, the island's healthcare system is stretched to its limits, and the government is well aware that it simply can't afford a major second wave.
That report by the BBC's Will Grant. A major study has shown that cheap, readily available steroid drugs can save lives of some patients who are critically ill with COVID-19. The findings of the research, which was coordinated by the World Health Organization, are already being implemented by doctors in some countries. The BBC's James Gallagher reports.
When coronavirus first emerged, there were no drugs that could treat the infection. Then the big breakthrough came in June, when a trial in the UK showed that a steroid called dexamethasone could save lives. As a result of that study, all clinical trial data investigating steroids from around the world has now been gathered together and analysed. The results published in the Journal of the American Medical Association confirm dexamethasone works and that another steroid, hydrocortisone, is as effective. The combined data on more than 1,700 critically ill patients showed 40% died on standard therapy, but this fell to 32% with steroids. Professor Martin Landry from the University of Oxford said the drugs worked only in the sickest patients.
Giving them low doses of corticosteroid, of which dexamethasone is perhaps the best known example, actually reduces their risk of death, improves survival. Really, at the point at which you reach for the oxygen cylinder for a patient with COVID, you probably should be reaching for the prescription for the corticosteroid.
As COVID develops, the body's immune system can go into overdrive. This damages the lungs and other organs. Steroids work by calming the immune system. Dexamethasone has become widely used since the first trial results. The latest findings give more options to doctors, and the NHS said it was already working to make hydrocortisone available. However, these drugs are not a coronavirus cure. A third of critically ill patients died even with the steroids. So the search for more effective drugs and a vaccine to prevent people getting ill in the first place continues.
The BBC's James Gallagher there. As you heard earlier, MPI has put a temporary hold on considering any further cattle livestock export applications as a result of that ship gone missing with 43 crew members on board, 2 New Zealanders. Michelle has gone in touch to say, great MPI doing the right thing and close the cruel loophole. May it be for once and for all. Ruth got in touch to say it is utterly cruel to confine any animals for a much shorter length of time anywhere, let alone the weeks it takes to travel to China on the often turbulent ocean. This practice needs to be stopped now by our government, which often speaks of kindness, an action which we all ought to extend to animals as well as our fellow humans. Thanks for getting in touch, Ruth. And other feedback on James Shaw and whether he should step down as co-leader of the Greens. William says, I've got heaps of respect for James Shaw, and although I voted NZ First last time, I'm fast losing respect for Winston Peters, who before he started taking pot shots at his coalition partners and supporters, had my vote again. AJ has got in touch to say, I was glad to hear Gareth Hughes' support for James Shaw there. I am a Greens voter, for lack of a better option, and am not necessarily a big supporter of Mr Shaw. But I think he's been treated incredibly unfairly for trying to get a small win for the Greens amidst the tranche of infrastructure spending coming from the PGF. That's obviously in relation to him being one of the ministers to approve $11 million for a private green school in Taranaki. That's all we've got time for this evening. First up, we'll be back with you first thing tomorrow. We're back tomorrow afternoon.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Ministry for Primary Industries will not consider any cattle livestock export applications for the time being amid the search for survivors of a missing cargo ship. Some Auckland schools are less than half full as nervous parents fear the spread of COVID-19. Legal action is being taken against a community health company accused of failing to give staff their entitled breaks and correct pay. A woman in managed isolation was denied medical help and told to hang in there after repeatedly reporting excruciating pain from infected wisdom teeth. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Tonight on Nights, Eleanor Tremere on representation in science fiction. If we can't break through the glass ceilings now, maybe we can in the future. Krista Steenbergen's assessing the fiction and fact behind Vibranium, a plot device in the Marvel comics.